Hello, everybody. This is spiritual teacher and intuitive healer Matthew John here, and I am so excited to be joined by a very special guest today. Definitely someone that I've looked up to in the New Age community. His books, Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love have been some of the most inspirational books in my personal journey and also inspirational for the work that I do for all of you. So I'm very, very happy and honored to welcome to my channel, Rob Schwartz. Thank you for joining me, Rob.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Wonderful. So this book, Your Soul's Plan, and in a minute, I'll definitely ask you about how this first book came about, what was going on in your life that inspired this. But I do have to share it. You know, this book came to me, I would say, in a very divinely timed, divinely oriented way at a very dark period in my life, what I would call my last dark night of the soul. And during this dark night of the soul, I was really confused, really looking for answers. This book became such an inspiration for me because it gave me a sense of hope that what I was going through, first of all, I wasn't alone. And second of all, that there was a reason for everything, that life wasn't just the random occurrences of bad things and traumas happening to you, that there's a reason for everything. And this book really inspired me to get along with my own personal spiritual path. And then it became the inspiration for so much of my work. For example, my soul plan readings, just a couple of years after reading this book, I had my guides come to me and start to, with clients, show me people's life plans and show me visions of people's past lives and give me information about people's specific lessons that they need to learn in this lifetime, and also specific soul contracts with others, with family members, romantic partners, etc. So I want to thank you so much, from my heart for this book, because it was such an inspiration. And thank you for coming out with more books. And I'm sure I speak for my entire audience saying that we hope that there's more on the way as well.
Working on the fourth.
Wonderful, wonderful. I can't wait. So, yeah, can you share, how did this first book come about? And like, who were you before this book?
Believe it or not, I was a corporate person. I was in the corporate world. I have an MBA and was self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different kinds of corporate writing. I did not enjoy that at all. And more to the point, I had this nagging sense that I had come to Earth to do something else, something quite specific, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't even know how to figure out what it was. And so for a long time, I felt lost. But then back in 2003, from May until July, August, three very important things happened in that time period that propelled me in the direction I'm still going in now. One was I had my first session ever with a medium. I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship at that time, but she said to me right at the beginning of the session, "Your spirit guides are here." I said, "What is a spirit guide?" I'd never heard of that before.
Sure.
And she explained that. And then she said, "Your guides would like to speak directly with you." And she started to channel them. And the first thing they said right out of the box was, "You planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born." And I'll tell you, I just shook my head and I said, "Well, why in the world would I have done that?"
Yeah.
And they said, "You did this for purposes of spiritual growth." But what was really impressive is that then they launched into this long monologue in which they explained why I had planned each of my challenges. And they knew what all of them were without me telling them anything about myself, nor had I told the medium anything before the session. So this experience just blew my mind wide open. And in the days and weeks after that session with the medium, I thought about this perspective constantly. And it created quite a deep healing for me because it allowed me for the first time to see deeper meaning or deeper purpose to many of my biggest challenges. Then I thought, well, if this perspective can create this kind of healing for me, surely it can do the same for others. And that was when I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. Within a very short time of that experience, I was introduced to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her higher self. And I had the opportunity to spend about 15 hours talking with her higher self just about pre-birth planning. So it was explained to me in great detail. And that 15 hours of channeled information really served as the foundation for the work I went on to do. And then the third and by far the most impactful thing One afternoon in the middle of the week, I took a break from work and was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk. And I had this spiritually transformative experience in which every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional
Mm,
love for that person washed over me.
mm,
Those are the words that get closest to it in the English language, but those words really don't even begin to touch it. And this experience, it only lasted about an hour, but it was so profound. It changed everything about the way I understand myself,
mm.
everybody else, and the nature of life. And you could say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know in this experience that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. So I got that message loud and clear. What I didn't know was why this was happening. That became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had looked at a lot of people's pre-birth plans for my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And
Mhm.
what I found, without exception, was that every single pre-birth plan was based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. And then I realized, oh yes, that experience walking down the sidewalk that day, that was gifted to me so that when I found this in my research, I would be absolutely certain that what I was finding is true. And
Yeah,
that's why I can say to your audience with absolute certainty and
yeah,
confidence, we as souls are made from the energy of unconditional love.
yeah. Beautiful. That what a wonderful way to come about into this work, and I absolutely corroborate that and agree with you 1,000%. That we ultimately everything is based off of love, and that's what's so difficult for. I mean, you said it yourself when you heard it from the medium back in '03 that you couldn't believe it at first to hear that there's actually a meaning for all this, and it actually comes from love because we look at the world, and the world is quite honestly very messed up, and we look at what happens in our lives, all the tragedies that all of us have to go through, and everyone has to go through different tragedies. And I get people every day, 7 days a week, and I try to help them as best they can to understand why they had to go through what they went through. But let's talk a little bit about just the basics of life planning. Why does a soul plan specific tragedies, obstacles, difficulties? It's like the most common question I get asked is like, why couldn't this have just been like a super smooth ride for me? Like, why did all this have to happen?
My understanding is that the soul learns particularly well through contrast.
Right, right.
So let's take a common example. Let's say that there's a soul whose pre-birth intention is to deepen in compassion, which would be a common pre-birth intention. There's a very high likelihood that that soul will plan to incarnate in a nuclear family in which he or she will be treated with a profound lack of compassion. That's the contrast.
Yes.
The contrast is intended to drive that individual
Right,
within, where hopefully over time they cultivate self compassion. And
right.
then sometime down the road, they take that compassion they have for themselves and turn it outward in service to others.
Learning through opposites, right?
That's exactly right.
That's how we do it. And I'm also an astrologer, and I love looking at the astrological applications of these things. And I look at the lunar nodes first and foremost when I look at someone's chart, because the North Node is going to determine the direction that the soul intended to take you in this lifetime. And the South Node is going to determine what you already know, what you spent your last couple lifetimes doing. And for me, for example, I'm an Aries North Node, Libra South Node. So for me, this lifetime is about learning independence. So I chose a mother who I love dearly. She's my best friend. But when I was growing up, I was an only child. She's a little bit overbearing, right? And so that friction that created, it was always like, Mom, leave me alone, leave me alone, let me make my own decisions, let me do things for myself. But that's what I needed in order to cultivate what my soul wanted in this lifetime, which was to learn independence, to learn to be a leader. I incarnated with a numerology of one, a path of one, which is a leader. One, an Aries North Node, Leo rising. So my soul very much wanted me to learn leadership in all ways. So I chose different situations also in school growing up that made me have to stand up for myself because it wasn't natural. It was natural to kind of run away from conflict, run away from people being mean to me, but I had to learn to stand up for myself in certain ways. So the soul does this for everyone, right? You'll come into a family, You'll come into a geographic location. You'll come in with a specific astrological natal chart. It shows you what you already have kind of done in the lifetimes before this that you don't really need to work on so much, and especially what you really do need to work on in this lifetime, because it's kind of unfinished business.
I agree with everything you just said, except that I wouldn't say that this is the way it works for literally everyone. There are people who are having what I refer to as a vacation lifetime, where
I
things
would
are,
call it like a bodhisattva lifetime.
well, that's a little bit different. That to me is something else. But a vacation lifetime is one that is relatively smooth and easy. And the reasons for planning that, one, it could be a reward to yourself for having done well in one or more past lives. And two, it could simply be that you've never had one before, and so you want to try it because the soul wants to experience everything.
Everything. That is a brand new perspective, Rob. I never ever thought of before this moment. A vacation lifetime.
That's what I call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So a pretty smooth lifetime where not a whole lot of difficult things happen. But that's pretty rare. I mean, I can't think of anyone that, but I guess the reason people go seek out psychics is because
Right.
they have issues, right, to work through.
I think the people who are coming to you and me, they have very challenging lives and they're trying to make sense of those challenges. But those people who are on vacation lifetimes, they play a very important role in the world, which is they show us what life can be like. Because if you think about it, if literally everybody on the face of the planet were suffering tremendously, we would conclude that life is suffering.
Right.
And that, I think, would be a very unfortunate and inaccurate conclusion.
Right. But also, isn't it important to remember that, like, when we look at people in the world, especially nowadays in the 2020s, where social media is so pervasive, and it's like for at least the younger generation, people my age and younger, it's the way that we interact with the world in general. And we can see people out in social media and think that they've got it all made. Yet behind the scenes, there's stuff going on that we never know about. The idea of a vacation lifetime, although I'd never considered it before today, actually does make sense to me, because I completely agree with you that the soul wants to experience absolutely everything. And me being an astrologer, I look at the zodiac wheel and I see that the soul wants to experience all 12 signs in many different ways, and wants to experience both the light side and the shadow side of things. So, for example, let's take into account Taurus. Taurus has to do with the material world and also the earth, nature, and animals. But someone that really wants to experience a very Taurian sort of life could create a life plan, create a life where they're going to be born into wealth, for example, and they get to experience just being in riches without having to do much, just being surrounded by luxury. Or they could have created a life where they come in their last lifetime from poverty, right? Maybe a Scorpio South Node, they come from poverty. And in this lifetime, that they grow up in poverty, and then that poverty motivates them to move out of that poverty and move into wealth. And then also the dark side of it, right? At some point in some lifetime, they're going to want to experience excess, like the devil card in the tarot. They're going to want to experience going way too much into materialism, into excess, into greed, and to experience the emptiness of that.
Yeah, I think everything you said makes a lot of sense. Again, the soul wants to experience it all.
Everything, right?
Yeah.
Now, just briefly, like something like a vacation lifetime, that wouldn't mean that you have no karma. It would just mean you're taking a break from balancing the karma, right?
Exactly.
So you would incarnate maybe into a geographic place, into an ancestral lineage, into a family where maybe there's not the deep, dense karma from past lives with those people. You'd probably pick some people that it's like, hey, you're in this soul group way over here. We haven't really done anything. I want to take a little bit of a break from working on karma and just experience a good lifetime here. Can we team up here?
Yeah, that's more or less my understanding. The one thing I would add to what you just said, when we talk about karma, there's an important distinction to be made between balancing karma and releasing karma.
Okay.
Balancing karma means you plan to have a new experience that energetically offsets a previous experience. Releasing karma means you heal the underlying tendency that created the karma in the first place. So, in other words, if the only thing you do is balance karma without also releasing it, you'll end up recreating the same karma over
It's
and
like
over
throwing this like boomerang back and forth,
Right.
and just creating. That's such a great point, Rob. Like a lot of times what I see when I look into people's soul contracts with family members or with, a difficult romantic partner, I can see lifetimes where they just throw karma back and forth. It's like in one lifetime, I'm the bad guy. Then in the next lifetime, you're the bad guy. Then I'm the bad guy again to rebalance that. But at a certain point, my understanding is that the eventual trajectory of all soul contracts is resolution, is I would call it karmic resolution. Maybe you'd call it karmic releasing. I don't know what term you'd use, but it's my understanding that ultimately we're supposed to release all of the negativity that we've created by alchemizing it into wisdom and service. So first by understanding it, and then eventually by in some way alchemizing that wisdom into actually helping people. And very often we end up helping the same types of people that in other lifetimes we hurt those people, or even we were those people, usually both.
That is my understanding as well. What I want to add there is that, as I understand it, you decide for yourself, based upon what you see in your life review at the end of an incarnation, you decide for yourself whether or not you're complete with an experience. It's not the case that God or some being or counsel external to you is saying you have karma here. You and the other significant people from the incarnation see this in the life review, and then you might or might not feel complete with certain experiences. But if you feel complete with them, as I understand it, then there is no karma.
But if the you that could feel complete with them, that's not the you that's in the physical body. That's the you that's seeing things from a much higher perspective, correct?
That's exactly right. And this brings us back to the whole reason why souls plan big challenges before they're born, because the you that you are when you're back on the other side looks at things very differently than
Right.
when you're incarnate. One of the big differences is that from the non-physical vantage point, a lifetime looks very brief. It doesn't feel that way when you're here, especially if you're suffering.
Would you say that it might seem like a dream? Like, for
Oh,
example,
yeah.
we go to sleep at night and, we're when we're asleep, it seems like we're in this long, drawn out, adventure. And then we wake up and it's like, oh, it was just this brief dream.
I think that that's a great analogy. And also, when you're planning your life, you know that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And you also know that the wisdom that comes from the experiences will be part of you literally for all eternity.
Right.
So people, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, people say, well, I would never have planned these terrible things to happen to me. But if you think about the perspective that a lifetime is very brief, nobody is permanently harmed, and yet the wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity, from that perspective, you actually would.
And essentially, we can, for a moment, once in a while, detach ourselves and really see that this life is just a game. It really is a game, and this is just a playing field. And we're all actors. I see the soul as the actor and taking on different roles, and souls that are together in like soul groups. They'll choose a certain time period and a timeline to come into together, and they'll say, okay, I've got this karma to balance. So you've got this karma to balance with me. I've got this karma to balance with you. How can we write a script that can help us all to move through what we need to? And we'll play these roles and it'll be fun. And then we'll come back and see each other again in the astral realm, and then we'll plan a different adventure. But ultimately, from the perspective of the soul, it's kind of like a fun game, even when it's painful, right?
That's exactly right. And this is why Shakespeare said something like, life is a play on a stage. That's exactly what he was referring to. Interesting side note there. It's my understanding that Shakespeare was an incarnation of Saint Germain. And the reason Saint Germain chose the name William Shakespeare, it refers to the will of the I am presence to shake a spear at humanity's darkness.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah, I so often, I've written many times in some of my blog posts, the analogy that the soul wants to experience everything just like a Shakespearean play. Because, Shakespeare's play has really included every possible human emotion, really every possible major human experience. One way or another, we experience all of that in the container of a single lifetime. We experience grief, we experience love, joy, success, failure, all of it. But in certain lifetimes, we experience less of some and more of others. But if we take into the context a whole, if we imagine all of our lives divided into like a pie, slices of a pie, we're going to experience all of those over and over again in many different ways, right?
That's exactly my understanding as well.
One thing I wanted to add, you were talking about, which is a very interesting perspective that, and it's not something I've really considered, that you, like after the life review or during the life review, you as the soul self are basically saying, oh, yes, we've balanced this, or no, we've balanced this, and we want to create another soul contract in a different incarnation and work on this further. Now, what about the perspective that negative karmic experience create imbalances in the energy field, and those imbalances then are going to attract certain experiences in a future lifetime to help to rebalance whatever those experiences are? So, for example, let's say you had a lifetime where you were murdered. Let's say you were stabbed in the stomach because you were like a political dissident or something. So that's going to have a solar plexus theme to it. It's like your power was taken away, and there's going to be this wound somewhere in your energy field, first of all, from the stabbing, but also from, this experience of having your power completely taken away. And also there might be something to do with the throat chakra because your voice was taken away. And because of that, there would be imbalances in literal energy field that would then attract experience.
I believe that does happen. I think what probably happens is that after the life review, as we've talked about, a soul will say, well, I'm complete with that lesson, or I'm not complete with it. And if they feel incomplete with it and decide to work on it again in the next incarnation, then I imagine things are set up before they come into body so that the chakras and the energy bodies have the imprint, so to speak, that will create the desired experiences.
The vision I get is like sitting at one of those long tables in the astral realm or heaven or whatever you want to call it. And you're like drawing out the chakra system of the person you're going to come into. Because my understanding is that the backs of our chakras store the wounds from past lives. And then that's what will be the attracting mechanism, like a magnetic mechanism to attract certain circumstances in this lifetime for us to negotiate whichever lesson. So maybe that's the case. Yeah. I could see that.
I think probably that is the case.
Yeah. So let's talk about soul contracts, because this is definitely one of the most common things that people ask me about and people want me to read for them. How is a soul contract written, and what is in a soul contract and what isn't in a soul contract?
My understanding is that the life plan is created by the soul, by the higher self, in consultation with guides, angels, ascended masters, God or source, or whatever term you would like to use. And then, as I understand it, then the soul creates the personality that will be in the body in the upcoming lifetime. And the personality is informed, here's the life plan. At that point, the vast majority of people agree to the plan and then they incarnate. But there's a small percentage who start to experience human emotions like fear and doubt. In particular, fear or doubt that perhaps there's too much in the plan. So
Right.
if you express fear or doubt, you're reassured by your whole non-physical guidance team. You can do this, and all of it is for your highest good and everyone else's highest good. At that point, the vast majority who expressed fear or doubt then agree to the plan and incarnate. But there's a small percentage of those who express fear or doubt who continue to express fear or doubt. And if you do that, then the plan is amended until it's acceptable to you.
Now, that part of you that would be expressing fear or doubt, would you say that's a different part of you than the soul? Is that like a lower soul, would you call it? Or
so my understanding of the personality is that it's a portion of the soul's energy placed into a physical body. So we're talking at a point here where the energy
you're just about to come in and you're actually seeing yourself in the body.
Yeah, you're just about to come in, assuming you agree to the plan.
Right.
But it's not, you're not in the entirety of the higher self. You're, I don't like the term lower, but I'm not sure what other term to use. So
your energy is starting to funnel like into a more dense place, would you?
Yeah, you could say you're becoming a more focused energy.
Right, more focused,
I would put it that way. Yeah, so then you're informed of the plan. And again, if you think it's too much for you, it will be modified until it's acceptable to you.
Okay, interesting. And then what about specific soul contracts with other beings? So a soul that you know well, maybe a soul in your soul group, you say, okay, I'm going to play the role of your father or your mother. You're going to play the role of my son. Look, let's go through all the karmic experiences we had before and how do we want to plan this lifetime? How specific is the soul contract between you and another soul in your view?
I think there's a fair amount of variability there. As a general rule, I think what's being done on the soul level is you're laying down themes, or what you could call karmic tracks. These are the broad intentions or the broad directions for the upcoming incarnation. And then there's a lot of variability built into that plan because your soul is taking into account the fact that you will have free will. And your soul wants you to have free will. That's the only way truly meaningful learning can occur. Otherwise, we'd all be automatons.
Right.
So the soul knows that in general, you're headed in this direction and that direction. But depending upon your many, many free will decisions, there might be a challenge with A or a challenge with B or a challenge with C. Now, sometimes what I've seen is that the planning can be quite specific. If something is really important to the soul, it definitely wants to have a certain kind of experience, then that can be planned quite specifically. There's a small number of experiences that are what you could say written in stone. That would be something like being born with a physical handicap that can't be treated by medical science in that time period, which is something you would know. If you're born with a handicap that can't be treated by medicine, then short of what we call a miracle, you will have the handicap for the duration of that lifetime. So that's quote unquote written into stone. Or your selection of parents. Obviously, once you're born, you can't change who your parents are. But the number of things that fall into that category of being written in stone is pretty small. Most things are set up as potentials, and whether or not they actualize depend upon the personality's free will decisions.
And when we talk about the potentialities, I know one metaphor you had shared was like, tell me if I have this correct, like a stack of papers, and the papers on the bottom might be more of the lower possibilities, and the papers on the top will be more of the higher possibilities. And it's your free will. We could call this timeline jumping. We could call this the law of attraction based on your frequency, right? You're going to find yourself in a higher probability of manifesting either a higher or a lower timeline.
Yeah, and I want to explain where that analogy comes from. My wife is a channel, and she channels a group consciousness, a collective of beings that we refer to as the beings of light. They're very wise, loving, highly evolved beings who exist in a state of unity consciousness. And what they have explained through my wife is they said, it's not the case that a person has just one pre-birth plan. Everybody has many. And if you think of a stack of sheets of paper, then each sheet of paper is a set of pre-birth plans. They vary by vibration. The sheets at the top of the stack are the highest vibration. That's where most of the learning is done through love, peace, and joy. The sheets at the bottom of the stack are the lowest vibration. That's where most of the learning is done through pain and suffering, and then everything in between. So these are essentially timelines, as you just said. And because that's how it works, it becomes very important for people to understand this and to raise their vibration in any way they can. The way you get to a higher sheet in the stack is by raising your vibration.
Let's talk about contracts with guides. Like, how do we set up a contract with a specific spirit guide? Why do we set up contracts with spirit guides? And are they all the same, or do we kind of pick and choose what we want the guides to assist us with?
My understanding is that people have, in general, people have guides who are with them over many, many incarnations. But depending upon the plan for a particular lifetime and depending upon the free will decisions made in that lifetime, you might very well draw to yourself a new guide who has a new area of expertise. So, for example, let's say that somebody did not plan prior to birth to go to medical school, but then when they're here, they decide they want to do that. Then you would probably draw to yourself a new guide who was perhaps a doctor in a past life, has expertise with medicine and can guide you through the experience of attending medical school.
But why wouldn't you have already made a plan with that guide beforehand?
Well, you might very well have, but I'm talking about a potential life plan in which the attending of medical school was not discussed, or if it was discussed, it was viewed as probably a low probability event. In other words, when you pick up a new interest, as I understand it, there's an infinite number of guides available to us, and you draw energetically to yourself whoever will best serve you in exploring this new interest.
Interesting perspective. Do you believe that we each have like a main spirit guide?
I think most of us have 2 or 3 main spirit guides.
In your view, why do some people get saved from, let's say, an accident by their spirit guides, and why do others not?
Well, there's a story like that in my first book, Your Soul's Plan. There's a chapter about accidents, which I'm putting in quotes here because they aren't really accidents. And one of the 2 stories in that chapter is about a man who, I think he was in his 20s at the time this happened. He was at a pool party during the summer and was standing at the edge of a swimming pool thinking about diving in head first. And it was part of his pre-birth plan to have a very serious accident. So in the channeling session we did with him and his spirit guides, what his guides told me was that when he was standing at the edge of that swimming pool thinking about diving in head first, if a serious accident had not been part of his pre-birth plan, then they would have been there whispering in his ear, so to speak, don't do that, that's dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
But they said in his case, since the accident was important to this lifetime, they didn't say anything. They themselves stepped back and they let him go ahead and dive in. He hit his head on the bottom and was rendered quadriplegic because that was important to his life plan.
What did his soul really want to learn through that experience?
Well, one of the main reasons, and there are a number of them, that we plan traumas or great challenges is to cultivate qualities that are important to the soul. And I call these qualities divine virtues. It's things like compassion, unconditional love, empathy, patience, faith, trust, and there are a number of others. It often has something to do with whatever divine virtues the soul wanted to cultivate in this lifetime. So to take the example of somebody who has an accident like that, it could be that the accident provides both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate self-love, self-compassion, greater faith in the goodness of life in the universe, greater trust in spirit. Now, there's a risk to that because it can go in the other direction too. You could lose your faith, you could lose your trust. So that is a risky kind of life plan, but that would be one of the main motivations.
Yeah, and when we talk about people that, let's say, are experiencing consistent illness in this life, chronic illness, maybe they had come into a lineage where there's difficult genetics, and then those genetics expresses illness in this lifetime. What are some of the main reasons you would say that a soul would choose to experience a lot of illness in a life?
I would say to cultivate greater compassion, to cultivate greater faith and trust, to potentially to cultivate more patience. It almost certainly is going to have a big component of service to others. Now you might ask, well, what could that possibly be? Well, a common example would be somebody plans to be in a caregiver role to the person who has the ongoing illness. That is a difficult role to play, but it's also one that produces a lot of growth for the soul. So, for example, in Your Soul's Gift, my second book, there's a story about a man who planned before he was born to care many years for his wife who was going to have dementia. And it was a very, very difficult situation for him. He was completely responsible for all aspects of her care. She really couldn't do much of anything for herself. But that was the experience that he planned prior to birth that he wanted to have for his own growth and learning. The other main reasons for planning big challenges, balancing, releasing karma, which we talked about, healing, by which I mean you bring back into body unhealed energies from past lives for the purpose of healing them. Service to others, we touched on. Experiencing contrast, we touched on. And then another main category is correcting or healing false beliefs or false feelings about oneself. And what I mean there is that the average person has had at least one, and usually many, past lives in which certain things happened that caused you to pick up a false belief or a false feeling about yourself. Two of the most common false feelings about self are powerlessness, that you are completely powerless, and two, that you're completely helpless. The
Hmm.
soul knows that those are discordant beliefs or feelings. They're not actually true. So if you pick up a false feeling or false belief like that, the soul wants to clear it and will plan challenges that are intended to provide the opportunity and motivation to clear those false beliefs or false feelings.
Very interesting. Now, a question about animals. Can you talk a little bit about why animals and pets can be important and how we might have soul contracts with animals and pets?
Sure. Well, I'll use this story in my second book, Your Soul's Gift. There's a whole chapter about the pre-birth planning we do with our pets. The story there is about a woman who plans for reasons of her own to be a dwarf. She's actually only 4 feet 8 inches tall in this lifetime.
Hmm.
So she sets up this plan in her pre-birth planning session, and then her guides essentially say to her, this is going to be very challenging for all kinds of reasons, especially when you're a child, because you will be so much smaller than the other kids. They're going to tease you and ostracize you. And then the guides say, we need to put supports in place to get you through this very difficult experience. The plan they come up with is that she will be surrounded by all these unconditionally loving pets. And the future pets come into her pre-birth planning session and talk with great love and great intelligence about how they are going to support her. And essentially, they say to her, we will love you unconditionally, even as you're being rejected by all the other kids at school. And that was the way it worked out. She would come home in tears after being teased by the other kids. And she had the ability to talk with her pets telepathically. So, for example, one was a horse, and the horse would say telepathically to her, jump on my back and let's go for a ride.
Mhm.
And all the other animals did things like that as well. They loved her through that experience. In my third book, Your Soul's Love, there's a story about a woman who plans before she's born to be single and without a partner for most of this lifetime. But she, like the other woman I mentioned, plans before birth to be surrounded by loving pets to help her get through that experience. And what we found out when we talked to her guides for that particular chapter is that there were two souls who had been with her in the last incarnation, in which she was a Native American, and they were as well. They were her sons. They wanted to come back to her again as her children, but because her life plan was to be single all of this lifetime, she wasn't going to have children. And they decided really the best way to be with her was to be her dogs, her pets, and that's what they did.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, brief question, because people ask me about this all the time, and I certainly have looked into it in past life regressions. And is it possible to that your soul is in more than one body at the same time, in the same time period, in the same timeline?
My understanding is that that does happen, that it's relatively unusual.
Mhm.
I don't have any way of verifying this, but I'm told that my soul has, or at least had, a second incarnation going parallel to my current lifetime. And supposedly, this other person is a shaman and a leader of a primitive tribe in Africa, which
Hmm.
is very superstitious. They have a lot of superstitions. And what I was told by Spirit is that what I'm learning about life and pre-birth planning is being energetically conveyed to him for the purpose of dispelling primitive superstitions in his tribe. Again, I have no way
Wow.
of verifying
Yeah.
that, but that's my understanding.
In past life regressions I've done with others, very rarely, once or twice, have I seen that it does seem like there's another person that your soul's incarnated into in the exact same timeline, but they're both, in both cases, the person was on the other side of the world and they would never meet that person. But I have seen that in past life regressions that people have been in alternate timelines on Earth, like where different events play out than what is playing out today. And also, I've seen very interesting situations where people spent time after death, like as a ghost or, walking the earth as a spirit and not going back to the astral plane right away. So I've seen all sorts of different weird things that can happen with that. All right. Well, Rob, where can people find the books?
You can read large excerpts for free at my website, which is yoursoulsplan.com. You can also order the books in the store of the website, or any bookstore or library, pretty much anywhere should be able to get the
They're
books
all
for
over.
you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure my audience appreciates it. And if you like the chat, please comment below. Please share this with others. And thank you, everyone. Namaste.
Thank you. Pleasure.